Welcome back to Composition and its Allies. My name is Barney. I'm a classical composer, and this is a channel for composers as well as performers interested in composition. Fugue for composers is for those of you who want to finish your first fugue. You're ready for fugue. Maybe there's certain things that could always be improved, harmony or counterpoint, but you feel you're ready and for some reason you just can't make it to the finish line. What I find is there are technical difficulties that can legitimately prevent composers from being able to compose a fugue. They're usually harmonic and not contrapuntal. I think composers are usually ready from a contrapuntal standpoint, but there are legitimate skills of harmony. But let's assume that you have the harmony pretty much figured out. Another block can be mental. So there's a lot of propaganda out there about what you can and can't do in a fugue, what you're allowed to do, and it's one of the blessings and curse of worshiping Bach. But let's assume that you're able to surpass those two hurdles. And let's say you started a fugue and you get somewhere, you put a lot of energy, and then you stop and you start and you just can't seem to make it. What I'd like to suggest in today's video is that you have to be better organized. This is a very unexpected skill set that is required for fugue. And what I'd like you to understand is that I think a fugue, think of it as a war, okay? You can't just win the war outright. You have to win it through a series of battles, or many battles, okay? And you can't just charge into battle. Now, sometimes, yes, you can just do a surprise attack, but sometimes you just have to be really, really prepared. You have to do full inventory, know that you're full reserve so you can really budget. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to do exactly that. Let's begin. Okay, so I have this fugue from my oratorio Paradise Lost. I talked a lot about it in the climax of your fugue video. I will not be doing a full play-by-play of everything we did there, but I will be referring to some of the general concepts, okay? So in that video, we did some of the preparatory work for a fugue, okay? So when you're organizing your papers, okay, you need to have two separate categories. So we have the preparation, and then we have the parts of the fugue. So the preparatory work are things that we talked about in that video. So you're figuring out the best key for your fugue. Okay, that's especially important for vocal fugues because you don't want to go out of range. You're going to think about the destination keys. So what are the keys that you want to go to in your fugue? Obviously in fugue school, you know, you go to the dominant, you go to the relative, but when it comes to your own style, that may not hold up, and it's always good to test in as many different keys as possible. Okay, so that's part of preparation work. There's also what I call long-term destinations. So you got to think about the ending. You got to know the key. Usually it's going to be the tonic. You got to think about the climax, all right? Because you want the listener to be engaged, and it's not going to happen unless you kind of have, you're directing them along un chemin, as they say in French. So these are just sketches that you do just as you're wading through the fugue and seeing how it works. It's also important to do this because you want to know the harmonic pacing of your fugue. Is it moving very quickly? Is it moving very slowly? If it's moving very quick, you might need lots of sequences or maybe not. So notice in my sketch paper, I have this marked in red. It's quite ugly, but I don't care. This is not about beauty of the visuals, it's about the beauty of the music, and I need to be organized. So for me, I marked it in red in all caps and I put it on the left-hand side. So that way, when I'm wading through my materials and trying to prepare for battle, that I know exactly what I'm looking at right away. You need to really free up your mental brain space for the hard parts of the fugue, which of course is the management of keys. As much as possible, the smaller tasks, you want to automate them, shall we say, and you can do that by having a really clear classification system using colors. But you do it as you like. Then we also have the parts of the fugue. So this is where I'm going more into investigating one particular section. So I generally find in fugue the maximum, let's say imagine that you have a 2 to 3 hour session, which is very, very luxurious. You're not going to be able to work on a lot of different sections, okay? For example, it can take 2 to 3 hours to write an excellent sequence, you know, because there's many different versions. You got to choose all the right accidentals, test it out, change the configuration of the voices. So when you go to work on, let's say, a divertissement, you want to have all your papers together, okay? Then when you work on the climax, you want to have all your papers together, all right? So let's look at the parts of the fugue. So the first thing I do is I write how many pages I have. So for example, my climax, I have 5 pages total. Okay, after the climax, I think I have 3 pages total. This is about the organization, right? When you go into a battle, you need to know how many tanks you have, how much supply of water, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Okay, this is a war. okay? And to win the war, you have to win enough battles or important battles, all right? But to do that, sometimes we just improvise and you just do a sneak attack, but that doesn't always work. Sometimes you just need to do preparation, especially if you feel lost. I highly recommend this preparatory work. So I'm going to work on the parts of the fugue. I'm going to go through the different parts of my fugue and just play through them, sing through them so the music comes back to my ears. So, exposition. I do not have the exposition written. Why don't I have the exposition written? Well, I think I talked about this in the climax of the fugue. One of the problems for a lot of composers is that they just start from the beginning, it makes sense, and they do the entire exposition, and then they get stuck. They have no idea where to go, and they put all their eggs in one basket. So what I like to do is I like to kind of plot out the terrain. In French, we say "il faut surveiller le terrain." Okay, you look at the entire battlefield, which is why I sketch out the ending and I sketch out the climax. So I did not do the exposition because I know I'll get to it at some point very soon. Then I have my divertissement. Okay, so this I consider as well as a part of the fugue, though it's not just one part like the exposition or the ending. It's going to be used continually to punctuate the fugue, to separate the different keys, to give kind of a relief for the listener. So for my divertissement, I have 3 pages. His scrupled not to eat, his scrupled not to eat, his scrupled not to eat. Okay, so when I play for my divertissement, and I highly encourage you to sing with your fugue, even if it's not a vocal fugue, was a vocal art form, right? It's coming from the voices as well as organ music, which in a way is very vocal. So I highly urge you to sing because a lot of things you only discover when you sing, especially the harmony. So the first big realization that comes to me is that, oh yes, I have 2 versions of this fugue, because you'll see this is in, what I just played is in a flat key, but the original version of my fugue is in a sharp key. So I remember, oh yes, the last time I was working on this fugue, which was like 3 or 4 months ago, 5 months ago, I had come to the conclusion that the pure version of the fugue is going to be in F sharp minor because it's part of an oratorio for Paradise Lost, and I want this really tonalité chargée, we say in French, it's really heightened key. But then I'm going to make a standalone version, so that's not part of the oratorio, of course, and I want to have a calmer key. I'm going to put it in F minor. Now, perhaps if I looked in my composition notebook, I would have had that very critical note, which I encourage you to write. But I find sometimes just reading words on the page, even if it's my own words, it's not enough to get back in the fugue. So instead, what I have to do is to just play through the fugue, and it comes back to me. So this divertissement goes from B flat minor to D flat major. So that means my divertissement so far is modulating from a minor key to the relative major. Next, I have my climax. So I have my climax is 5 pages, and notice that it is in C sharp minor. Okay, so C sharp minor is the dominant key in F sharp minor. So what does that mean? Well, it means that prior in my fugue, I'm going to avoid C sharp minor like the plague because I want it to be really fresh and elevated once I get there. Against his better knowledge. So I sing through the parts of my fugue and oh yes, I forgot. I have a chant, okay? This is something a lot of composers I think don't think about because it's not encouraged, I have found in fugue school, but Bach certainly did this, I think, in the B minor masses, the Confiteor. He brings in this chant in one of the middle voices later in the piece, and it's so beautiful, so simple, and just so powerful. So in the climax of my fugue, I have, of course, the subject, but strongly overcome with female charm. But then I bring in this really slow chant. So this is coming back to me. Now notice I have some pedals. So these long holds on C sharp and G sharp. All right, so what does that mean? It means prior in my fugue, I'm going to avoid pedals on those notes because I want it to be as powerful as possible. So you see what I'm talking about when you prepare for battle, it's coming, but the memories of my fugue, the spirit, the energy of the fugue is coming back to me. Though sometimes you can't do that. You just have to jump in, and it's really messy and sloppy, but it's just the most effective way. So you have to decide what's best for you. However, even though I'm going to avoid pedals on C sharp and G sharp prior in the fugue, maybe I want to prep the listener for some of these pedals. So maybe I'll have a shorter duration of a pedal on a different note in a middle voice, just to like kind of, French would say, faut planter le terrain, just for setting up the terrain. I also see I have this slowed down version of the subject for the baritones. But strongly overcome. So one thing that I find is un peu dommage, say in French, is that a lot of times in schools, they encourage us to do this exactness, like, put the subject backwards exactly, slow it down exactly, and it just never usually works. It's really rare that it works, and you also have to think about the listener. So some of these retrograde inversions, the listener is not really going to understand that. Maybe somewhere deep inside they can appreciate it, but I think there's a lot of work we do in fugue school that's more for the ego and more to show off your talent versus thinking about fugue composition. Next I have after the climax. So this is not as important as the climax, right? Because the climax is a huge structural moment, but you got to think about what is going to incentivize the listener to keep listening after the climax. So again, fugue is composition. You got to think about the climax, like what is that crazy thing you want to say that you want to save for the climax, but then how are you going to wind down the fugue? So I look at the climax, after the climax, I see it's in B minor, so that's the subdominant in F sharp minor. So something I'm thinking about, should I avoid this key prior in the fugue? Now you got to be careful you don't become into intellectual. So the C sharp minor, I definitely want to avoid that prior, so the climax is just like, so éclate, we say in French, it just explodes. But the subdominant, it's going to be kind of hard to avoid it if you're going to also avoid the dominant. Also, in my particular style, I tend to alternate between tonic and dominant. So probably I'm not going to avoid it, but it's just something to keep in mind. I look at the music I have, I see, oh yeah, I have this chant. But strongly overcome. So we already saw that in the baritone, so I see I placed it in the children's chorus. So I want something kind of post-climactic, I guess. I also have this parallel motion that I experimented with. But strongly overcome. Usually in fugue, you can't have parallel motion. Whatever. Doesn't matter. All right. So that's something is coming back to me now. So maybe prior in the fugue, I also want that kind of parallel idea. Or maybe I want to save some special treat for after the climax. Also, I notice I have this kind of melisma thing. But strongly overcome. Kind of ending on the dominant. So these are just some of the things that are going to be coming back to you when you take the time to sing through your fugue. Again, fugue is a war, okay? But you got to think about the battles, and you got to be prepared for the battles, except for those moments where you just jump in because you have nothing else to do. Now, finally, I have this really important cadence. With female charm. So I have this cadence where I go, instead of resolving the tension, I do a 5 to a 4. I find I do it a lot in my own music. And this is something very structural. So when I come across this, it reminds me that the whole point of this fugue is to get to that one specific moment. So now that I did all this preparatory work, I'm actually ready to start composing, and I think I'll start with this exact structural cadence right here. I hope that you found this useful. First recommendation is to shut off YouTube and to go compose your fugue. You have the time to watch this video, so why don't you have time to compose your fugue? Now, those of you who have already worked on your fugue today, congratulations. You can watch another video, the climax of your fugue. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.